I call Catherine Delahunty.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It is indeed ironic that a bill that supposedly addresses historic discrimination turns out to be a breach of the Bill of Rights. It suggests poor law at best, and it also suggests a deeply cynical attitude to what discrimination actually means. And what it means for the status of the Human Rights Tribunal will certainly be debated by lawyers and will no doubt end up in more painful litigation. However, I just wanted to address some of the arguments and context behind the bill. I don't claim to know everything about this issue. I've only been involved in it for the last 4 years. And I think that rather than blaming each other, let's all acknowledge that the Parliament has not dealt well with these families. The Parliament has not addressed the issue in the past, and that the Parliament has been dragged screaming to this point through the courts. Rather than saying who did what to who, nobody looks good. Let's just be honest, instead of pretending that anybody can hold their head up. None of us can. Why not be real about it? As for compassion, no one, especially not me, thinks that we have a monopoly on compassion. I'm sure that everyone in this House knows somebody who has an experience of disability and caring for disabilities. But what is interesting is where's the action? If we have all this compassion, if we understand Cliff Robinson's case so well, as everybody seems to, where was the action? Because I've been working with Cliff and the families for 4 years trying to get a response, and compassion is fine. Action is what the families want. Sympathy, empathy, all very well. Action, money to pay your bills in order to live with dignity while your family members also live with dignity is what that they want from us. And I think that's what we owe. And that's why this bill does not meet the needs of the people who so bravely went through the court case. Now, they haven't all been paid. They've been given an interim payment. They've been told that it might not be October before they get a remedy. So they, although they are protected explicitly in the legislation, no one else is protected. And that's why this legislation is such a serious matter. So let's have a look at the context behind the government's arguments. Apart from the fact that they wanted to protect themselves fiscally, which is really the only thing that the bill's clear about. In fact, the rest of it will be debated in ghastly family group debates between the Ministry of Health and the DHB and the families themselves, who are not always in the best position to advocate. And they bring many stories to the Greens about their ability to advocate complex issues around care with providers. It's not simple. They are the experts, but they are treated as if they're trying to rip off the system if they try to get paid for what they do. So I'm thinking about a family that I've been working with. They have a 14-year-old son who's has multiple health issues, 24/7 care, and who has chosen, and he has said this directly to me, I must stay at home with my family. So he wants his mother to be his carer, but in order to do that, the income of the family has been drastically cut. And so this family may or may not be able to get the money. It will depend on their ability to negotiate with MOH, and it will depend on whether the MOH and the DHB actually think that they are liable, whether they get in this capped amount of the $23 million per year, because it is very difficult for families to prove that. And there hasn't been, because of government policy towards this, there's been a fundamentally suspicious and punitive approach towards people caring for family members. It's as if they have to be spied upon because they might be ripping off the system, rather than acknowledging that what they're doing is a really, really important job, that it's cost them, in many cases, their own health and their mental health. But one of the government arguments is that families should do it for nothing. The debate was about natural care, and Minister Ryle continues to say that that's a tenet of the government's bill. Natural care is a wonderful sounding phrase, and natural care is what we do when we raise our children. It's what many of us did for our elderly parents when they needed support as they got older in their home. It's what many people do for family members. Whānau ora, natural care. But there comes a point where natural care, where the line is stepped over, and the stories that have been told to me about people who live in the other world, it's not natural care. It's not natural care for adults to have to wash and take care of, control and manage, feed, deal with and support some family members. We need to put the person with disability at the heart of the matter, and the person with a disability if they choose to be cared for by a family member, many times it's because they feel safer with that person than with carers on a 4-hour roster. So people might have a 24-hour roster where the carers change every 4 hours. They have changing carers. They don't know those people all the time. So they actually trust, surprisingly, their family member more. Now, the government's argument was that this could distort relationships in families. Of course it could. Power exists in all relationships, and especially between disabled people and their carer, whether they're a family member or an agency. It doesn't matter. And the reason that is always going to be a risk is that people with disabilities are at the bottom of the heap, and their status in our society is the lowest possible status that you can have. And their ability to advocate for themselves is severely limited by the barriers that we create. Not because they're incapable of articulating their needs, but because we are incapable in many instances of giving them the support to say what it is that they need. And I met with a number of groups in the last 4 years who've said we need change, we need a cross-party approach towards the issue of paying family carers so that the person at the heart of this is protected at all times and has the ability to choose. And the people I met, a number of them were saying, our young people want to live independently, but we cannot find a safe setup. Now, I know there are safe independent setups. They are more expensive than exploiting someone at home. But in my town, for example, there's a very good trust called the Lifestyle Trust, where they have 25 houses where young people and other people who want to live independently, some with complex intellectual impairment in particular, are supported. But if, like Cliff and his family and others, if they choose to stay at home, they should be able to earn a living wage. And so one of the most reprehensible and depressing aspects of the bill is saying that the people that do that work do not have to be paid what the outside carer gets paid. So you're setting up a bizarre anomaly where someone might get paid 8 hours a week or 8 hours a day to look after a family member, paid one rate, and then the carer will come in and get paid more. I guess you could call it progress because at the moment they're paid nothing, but actually what it's done to their human dignity is that after all the struggle, after all the court cases, all the bitterness and debate, they're still being told your work is not of value, that the caring that you do for your family member, you should do it for love. And love, Mr. Speaker, is very much involved in the sacrifice that's been made, and love should not be exploited, and workers who are family members should not be exploited. Which brings us to the issue of spouses. Actually, it is up to the disabled person if they want their spouse to care for them, if it isn't their mother, their father, or their brother, their cousin. But this law appears, and we should clarify this with the Minister, appears to not allow that. It makes an artificial distinction between who can be paid, whether they're a spouse or not. It does many other things as well. And it's interesting, given that whānau ora is supposedly the government's flagship, along with the Māori Party, which is potentially a liberating policy. But whānau ora means that the whole family are involved in an issue and their needs are met, and we recognise what families are trying to do together. And I think putting the disabled person at the heart and putting the whānau ora principle into this would have resulted in a very different piece of legislation. And it's very, very sad to see the discrimination that comes in this bill, which the Minister, of course, hasn't mentioned it. He hasn't mentioned the fact that in the bill it explicitly states that people will have no right to complain. None whatsoever, either to the Human Rights Tribunal or the court. So what this is saying is we have come up with an inadequate solution without proper consultation, and now we're going to shut it down. End of story. No more will people be allowed to complain. No more can they go to the Human Rights Tribunal, and those cases that didn't get on the list are over, and these people will be desperate, but no more will they have the right. I'm amazed at a law that actually says you will not have a right to take any kind of case to the Human Rights Tribunal. I think it's churlish when they've lost, and they lost a number of times in court. It's really churlish to say we're not prepared to even allow people to say any more. That's the end of the story. If you fail to be accepted through the assessment process, no more. Go home, look after your family member for nothing, or put them into a residential care facility that may or may not be acceptable to them, but that is the end for you. More will be said. We're against the bill.
I call Scott Simpson.
Mr Speaker, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to speak in support of this New Zealand Health